So thank you for those of you that have joined so far. Thank you. We'll start to give you a bit of an overview. It's probably fair to say that 2020 has given us some significant challenges and changes. It's also given us a chance to rethink of how things can be. Now, for some, the terms such as activity-based working, it's been very much a standard working practice within your organisations. And for some, for other organisations, it's going to be quite a cultural shift from the traditional working methodologies. I think there is also quite a basis of somewhere in between. So some people are gathering in between that part where you've maybe started the journey, and this is a way to accelerate that as well. The purpose of today's event is to really start to hear more around activity-based working, and also how the capturing of data can help provide insights that are able to support across whole areas of the business and all the way across the organisation. From myself, my name is Lucy Fox. I work at OpenSensors. At OpenSensors, we support organisations from the capturing of data in order to help you gain actionable insights into aiding and defining or redefining the future of your workplace. We're also joined by Louis and John, thank you. Louis was on a previous webinar of ours, and if you haven't had a chance to view that, I would thoroughly recommend going into the Resource Centre or contacting me if you want it redistributed. With over 20 years of experience assisting global organisations revolutionise new ways of working, huge insight in there, it's hugely valuable. And thank you to Louis and also for John for joining us today. And I will hand over now to Louis to also provide his intro.
Thank you, Lucy. It's really great to have this roundtable and to collaborate in a virtual way, in fact, and share understanding and knowledge about questions that we all have in relation to how we work in the future. As Lucy said, Veldhoen company, and we are very much working on helping organizations thinking about how do we want to work, and we've done that for about 25 years or more, originating in the Netherlands, but now being a kind of global, small, we say, boutique consultancy. Activity-based working is not a solution, but it's a way of thinking, and it helps people, in fact, to choose where and when to work and what they need to do their work in the best possible way. And it's far more than just the workspace. It's also the technology, but also the rules of engagement. How do you use the different tools you have to be effective and productive and motivated at work? And the COVID has done something to this. The fact that we've been sitting at home now for more than 7 months, and that shift has been happening quite abruptly, has led to some changes. It is very clear that there will be now a more hybrid economy coming, where we have working from home as, let's say, places where people will structurally do work. And that will be, for some organizations, that will be on average a day a week. Some organizations it might be 2 or 3 days a week. Some parts of the organization it might be no one. So it is not, let's say, universal. And organizations are also reacting quite differently on how they talk about this. So in France, Peugeot has, for example, said that people will, 80% of the staff will, let's say, work from home 4 days a week and only come to the office for 1 day a week. That's kind of a policy. A lot of other organizations don't go that way, don't go that far. And from our perspective, if you look at activity-based working, it doesn't make sense to, let's say, try to make it so rigid. It becomes a very important thing to discuss in the organization how to apply this to different groups in the organization and what it implies for leadership and for people to then work together. Which means that you need to firstly re-engage about why and how do we want to work. What is, let's say, what are what we call the guiding principles for how we work? What should our way of working live up to be successful as an organization? And then if you drill that down to teams in the organization. And from that, you can derive what it implies for the rules of engagement for working from home versus working at the office. The hybrid situation will be the most difficult one to tackle. Because let's say, having a meeting completely virtual like we have is far more equal than if some people are in a room and some people are joining remotely. Which means that we have to rethink for which meetings do we have what type of meetings? What are we going to apply on the different types of meetings? And where do we make it, let's say, something that you have to be physically together, or that we just do those things completely virtually? So that's an important thing. In terms of the way of working and the variety, we think people will still do focus work, individual focus work at the office. There will still be a mix of activities people need to be able to do the office. We are not robots. We're not going in for a full day of just collaboration or a full day of just doing individual focus work. So we need to find a balance, which means that we need to redefine also that, say, what is our activity pattern look like, and what of that activity are we going to perform elsewhere than at the office, and what does it imply for especially the smaller types of collaboration and a variety of settings for that at the office, because it's also quite likely that that will increase. So the mix of what you do in the office will be different. So in the past few years, what we saw in all organizations, that there's more and more focus on small collaboration, less on the larger informal collaborations, and that virtual collaboration was coming into the workplace as well. It's just being, let's say, the speed with that has happened now had just made that far more evident than ever. And the good thing is that a lot of organizations have done a lot in the past 6 months to improve that technology and the infrastructure to make that possible. The big thing that's lacking is the rules of engagement, but also how to use the technology in the most effective way. Because a tool like Zoom or a tool like Teams can only do part of the job, and part of Teams, for example, is the video collaboration. But everything you do on asynchronous collaboration and on, let's say, using other parts of those tools to collaborate becomes more and more important and needs focus from an organization perspective. We think that AVW has become even more relevant because as more people are going to work from home, there will be a significant impact on the amount of people that will be in the office on average on a daily basis, which means that we really need to rethink how to use space, and it doesn't make sense anymore to have assigned spaces for individuals that are empty more than 50% of the time. So there is, and that's nothing to do only with, there's not only with economics, that's also to do with the ambience and the dynamics of an office environment that inspire people to collaborate and work. The thing that we see most where organizations struggle with is that we tend to go and to want to solutionize too quickly. So we want to immediately answer the question without, let's say, making one step backwards and saying, but what is it actually? How do we want to work from a philosophical point of view? From a point of view of what are the business drivers and what are the values in our organization that make us us and that we want to strengthen. And at the moment, we're doing quite some works with large organizations about what we call the guiding principles for the way of working of the future. What does that way of working need to live up to? What is the assumption that we're going to take as an organization to what will be, let's say, the average amount of time that we think our staff will work at home? And that will be very dispersed in the organization, but what's the average? What is the implication of that for what we need to focus on if we want to live up to our values, for example, and if we want to ensure that collaboration and team cohesion is there. And we express that in what we call guiding principles and guidelines for the way of working. And that's mostly done at a leadership level because it's really something that's directly connects to the business. Once that's been done, we drill down to lower levels in the organization, because then you can go to teams and say, well, what are now our rules of engagement as a team that makes us effective, but within those guidelines, within the boundaries and the givens that we've said about, because that's what connects you as an organization. And the interesting question that's popping up at the moment is that with this working from home, you need to redefine what collaboration is about and which givens and boundaries you define on a organizational level, on a, let's say, a team level, and what the choices of the individual in this. So within which givens can I make those choices myself, and am I trusted to make the right choices? And the next step, of course, is to define, and then how do we support that in such a way that people are able to make those choices? I think data are becoming more and more important, besides, let's say, the less tangible elements in decision making, and there are more and more tools, let's say, for that, and more different types of data gathering that needs to be, used by organizations to together get a very good picture and continuously, in fact, look at what does this imply for the way of working we have so far and what should we amend. COVID has made us rethink how we want to work, how we need to work, and how are we going to, in fact, merge home working with the way of working we have. From an activity-based working perspective, that's not completely new. That has been there almost from day one of activity-based working, because home is one of the places where you could do certain activities. But it has become far more obvious to, in fact, leadership and employees as well, that it is a real option, that it needs some real attention in terms of how to manage that people can be trusted to work from home, but that also we need to develop new skills and rules of engagement, how to make that work in such a way that it not only benefits the individual, but also the collaboration and the collective. And we've defined a very simple 4-step approach to, in fact, redefine what is now happening post-COVID in our organization. What should we look into, and what are those guidelines and guiding principles that will work for us as an organization, because that's different in every organization. Before you start defining, so what's then the impact of those guidelines on space, on technology and the tools we have, but also how we use them, but also on rules of engagement and what we need to do to give people the skills and also help in, let's say, sharing and role modeling the mindset that's needed to implement it. So that's a kind of a 4-step approach that we have developed, and we are at the moment applying to a number of organizations, from, let's say, 2,000 people to an organization with 80,000 people. And as you can imagine, within an organization of 80,000 people, there is a lot of diversity. So it's not about one size fits all, which is also a very important thing to take in mind when you look at how to apply the activity-based way of thinking. It's not one size fits all. It's about supporting diversity, supporting different businesses that have different needs, but from a starting point that is quite the same in terms of the guiding principle and the guidelines that they need to live up to. And that's how you, in fact, connect choice on individual and team level to organizational culture. So that's what we're doing at the moment with a number of organizations. And this kind of process in 4 steps really helps to do so. From our perspective, we just talked about those guiding principles and the guidelines, and that's, as we said, on the organizational level. If we go further into the journey, and I'll skip this part of the journey where you develop your concept, but we go more into the implementation, then it's in the implementation when you've defined what your space would look like, what your technology would look like, where you start looking at, well, how are we going to support that? That's where the rules of engagement and really the norm discussion comes in. And it's connected to the guiding principles and the guidelines again, because they are the things that are, in fact, steering and directing every effort of the journey. And that's why a journey like this can be extremely powerful in terms of organizational development, at the same time as it creates an environment that people really love and thrive in. But the norms discussion is something that really helps, starts happening in the transformation part, in the implementation, where you apply the way of working to groups in the organization at team level. So in the end, it's about, let's say, having that. Let's say the main thing here is, again, is to focus on what will be more important going forward, as we have learned from COVID and what it has brought to us. And the process will ensure that you get to the right solutions. And so for us, the journey itself is a big part of the change. It's not just a change plan, it's doing the things in the right order and have the right discussions on the different levels in the organization. So you take people on a thinking journey that then becomes theirs, that delivers the solutions, but also the norms, the rules of engagement that are then really embedded and connected to the culture. And that's why they are also sustainable.
it's not an uncommon thought process that somebody will be at their desk, but will move away for periodic periods of time. That happened way before COVID. And absolutely, if we're looking at how the workplace will change, and there will be this activity-based work style type approach where people will work different from working from home, but also being in the office, it's more likely that that movement around could even become a lot higher. Traditionally, there were departments such as things like finance or I would say facilities that had a static home, if you like, throughout the day. But when we're certainly from a facilities or workplace perspective, that may have been your base, but we're a lot of times moving around the office to get to where you want to go to. Absolutely being able to look at workplace data. So being able to understand, for example, right the way down to desk level, but if I look at this purely from a floor, but it can go down to department level, to understand the peaks and averages, to understand the underutilized desks. And underutilized is how the shortest amount of time they're used. But actually being able to drill down from a department perspective. I think it's also very keen to think that this will change over time as new dynamics change. When new leaders come into the business or new dynamics change in a team, all of that changes. And unless you're capturing that data, you can't therefore know whether people are coming to the office more. Is that department's actually space ratios changed? Are they using more collaboration spaces? How is that impacted? How was it before? And what impact does that have on the departments or neighbourhoods around them? And how's that impacting them as well? I think where that becomes really critical is when you look at mobility profiles. That's a term that we talk about, and this is if you look at it from a department's perspective, or if you look at it from this areas of desk perspective, how are those desks used? So it looks like a large space with lots of areas, but here, by analysing the data, and that is by being able to understand by the asset being tagged, how frequently somebody is at that space, you can start to understand the profiles and the dynamics, and therefore the amount of desks that are needed for that space, the person to desk ratio space. So for example, on here, it says there are 20 fixed desks. So therefore that's 20 areas that are very, very, very highly used. They rarely move away from their desks. So it's a high occupancy asset. Semi-fixed, so they're using their desks periodically throughout the day, but they're frequently away for large periods of time. Then when you look at the semi-mobile, and certainly the mobile, those are the ones that are coming periodically back and forth to the desk. This is how life was before. Afterwards, you can see that the mobile space and the certainly semi-fixed space would certainly, there's a fair assumption to say that would increase. But actually over time, there will also be behaviour patterns of going back to fixed, because that is what people would be comfortable with, and that is what people may prefer. And it's knowing what mix is available and when. It's about making people comfortable with the data that's collected. It's about making sure their safety, their well-being, their environment is the best it can be to cater for them as an individual. So without collecting that data, you can't understand what that would be for them. You can't make ideas as to whether they need more collaboration spaces because you can see they're highly utilised. You can't understand whether the meeting rooms are rightly sized or sufficient for the type of use. But you also can't guarantee that there isn't enough space for them, so desk space to make it comfortable. And from that, I'm thinking about, yes, we've had an education very, very quickly with regards to the environment around us and what impact that can have to the spread of a virus and what impact that can have to well-being. Well, actually, there's also occupancy that will impact that as well. So all those things would make a difference. What I would say is the best way to do this is to help and educate and make people understand that this is for their benefit, and also be open. We work with a lot of our customers if they need support with communications. It's all about making sure that the need is there. I do wonder, and I'd be interested in thoughts on that, whether there'd be less fear of this now. And in fact, I'm seeing that as a great pull in certain regions that were certainly a little bit more reserved on this type of data capture before, using sensors to capture that. Actually pushing it now to say we want to have this within our environment. Our employees are requesting a way of making sure that their safety and their well-being is adhered to. When I look at the environmentals data and I see what impact that has, it's very easy, and I think we've become quite accustomed to understanding the environmental factors, so understanding temperature and the impact of CO2 on productivity. But actually, poor ventilation, will also have a huge impact on that. Now, those things I would say have been highly publicised in the news. And in fact, even last week, there was still an element around ventilation that was being highlighted across the news items and how it's important for inside buildings. But I think that it's the element of managing the occupancy levels at the same time, because they also have a bearing. When occupancy levels increase, as do these environmental factors as well, being able to monitor that, being able to understand that, and being able to plan for that and predict how that's going to impact is really key. I think moving forward, when we're talking about activity-based working, when we're talking about how we need to adapt and have that space, if people are going to travel into the office now, if people are going to make that commitment to go into the office, there would certainly be a need to want to make sure that there is space for them, for the tasks that they want to do. So I see booking coming together. I also see that it's a huge driver now to be able to understand booking versus occupancy. There's been numerous challenges over the years of room booking, people booking too much space, people block booking, people have been able to move, not being able to cancel those bookings, not being able to find a room, people booking a room but then going somewhere else. If that's then expanded to desks, think what that impact that will have to the environment. So by having that also on desks, imagine that all the desks that seem available are booked, and yet if you go into the office for your booked space, there is actually plenty of space around you and your colleagues couldn't join you. So having policies and behind that is going to be critical. And actually now is a good time, because it's also about the education. A lot of that has been done for us in it's safer. It's safer for you as an individual. For me personally, I'd want to know that my building, that where I go to for my place of work, is going to be safe for me. I am going to feel comfortable there. But also I want to know when I get there, I've got the space available for me for the tasks that we want to do. We've talked about collaboration spaces. We've talked about people going for meetings, but actually when I go, I'm also going to want some desk space for a period of time. And I think that's a really good point to raise. It's going to be becoming a lot more important that available space is made visible. People are going to want to know where they can easily and quickly find a space, either by booking it or by going there. And that's, if you think about collaboration spaces, that's probably the most common area. You're going to want to be able to facilitate that and be able to make sure that's available. I hope everybody on the call has had an opportunity to get some use from this. We will, of course, be following up. We can always send some material to you. If there's any information you need, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. We will also provide our contact details so you can as well. But the key takeaways is returning to work plans. So the employee well-being, so ensuring that an employee should they be able, willing and want to go back to the office, if they're wanting to do this activity-based task, and therefore we accept that there's going to be home working as well as office working, let's make the workplace a place that's safe for somebody to go to. By leveraging that data, you can also start to make tangible changes. You start to understand day-to-day operations, but you can also help to be able to future-proof and be agile with the way the environment will change, as it will. The workplace will change again over time. Being able to have defining the way of working that's fit for purpose. Again, being able to understand all of that, being able to understand all that data. And then, as Lou was talking about earlier, about the agility to adapt as well. I know that we are at the end of this session. I hope it's been useful to all of you. And thank you very, very much indeed for attending. Really appreciate it.